Hello, and welcome back to Top of the Hill. This week I'm sitting down with Mike Mullen, an independent in the race for the congressional seat to be vacated after the resignation of Nikki Tsongas. Tune in, as you will not want to miss this. For much of American history, politics has been in the hands of a two-party system, whether it was the Federalists and the Democrat-Republicans or the Democrats and Republicans of today. You are running as an independent candidate. Why are you doing so, and what does being an independent mean to you?
I'm doing it for a number of reasons. First of all, thank you for having me here today. It's great to be at the WAVM in Maynard High School. Running as an independent because I think the politics today have become too divisive. People are too focused on their party's interests and winning versus serving their constituents. I also think that the party system today serves corporate and special interests. And by coming at it from the outside, I think I'll have a better chance to have change, be a broker, find that common ground, and collaborate between the different parties. So that's kind of the main reason that I'm attacking it from the outside.
All right. One of the first representatives to this district, Elbridge Gerry, is synonymous with gerrymandering, the redrawing of congressional districts to benefit a certain political party. Do you believe this is a problem in American politics? And if so, what will you do to combat this?
I think it's a big problem. One of my main points on this campaign is electoral and political reform, and I think we need nonpartisan redistricting. A lot of that's done at the state level. The state legislatures work and draw the districts, but federal can impact that as well. There's legislation currently circulating around Congress that I would be supportive that would mandate that nonpartisan, and I think that's one of the reasons people need to understand that their local representatives, their state senators, their state reps are very important as well, because that will then bubble up to how the districts are drawn at the national level.
All right, thank you. So, on that note of political reform, back in 2010, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Citizens United in their lawsuit against the Federal Election Commission. This decision enabled many big money donors and corporations to donate to individual candidates, which could arguably lead to corruption. What do you think this decision has done to the state of American politics, and are there any fixes that could be made?
I think it's a big issue. It's definitely affected American politics. One of the things that it's done is created this situation with dark money. And what that means is there's not disclosure of who is funding these campaigns. What happens is people will funnel the money into a 504c corporation, which then will give it to the campaigns or the advocacy groups. And those groups just know that it came from that other foundation. They don't know who donated to that foundation. So you get this big lack of transparency there. One of the things that people don't realize as much is that when that Citizens United decision was made, it was a 5-4 decision, but there was a concurrent decision that was 8-1 that was in favor of enforcing those disclosure laws. We need to make sure that happens, and then we also need to reverse Citizens United. So this fall in Massachusetts, ballot question 2 is for creating a Citizens Commission to figure out the best way to do that, most likely a constitutional amendment. And I've gone on record endorsing ballot question 2.
All right. And on that note of transparency, there has been a lot of ethics questions within Congress, and specifically with this whole thing over Brett Kavanaugh and the investigation into various sexual harassment claims from his high school. Do you believe not only the Senate but Congress as a whole needs to do more to investigate these claims and any allegations of wrongdoing by any congressperson, either in the Senate or in the House?
I definitely think Congress is not above the law. They need to apply equally to those who are writing the laws as to those who are subject to them. So definitely believe that the same standards need to hold. These are very serious allegations that have been leveled against them. I don't think there's any reason to rush into a decision. I think the people need to be heard on these accusations. In the last before this past election, President Obama nominated Merrick Garland, and that never came before the Senate. So I find it a little bit difficult to swallow that there's a rush for this. I think these need to be vetted out. This is a lifetime appointment. We need to understand what what happened in those situations.
All right. Last year, the Republican majority in both houses of Congress repealed the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, without a replacement. Healthcare costs are also some of the highest in history in America, and are substantially higher in comparison to other first world nations. What are you going to do to fix this issue that affects so many Americans?
I just want to clarify first, Obamacare or ACA hasn't been completely repealed. The mandate has been, which is a very important component of that. But one of the things that's been big in this election cycle is whether pre-existing conditions will be covered. There's a case down in Texas now that's being discussed that will have impacts in that regard. So there are still important parts of that left that I think we need to fight to defend. To replace it, I'm in favor of moving towards a single payer system. My background is in healthcare IT. I've worked with payers, I've worked with provider groups, so I have a good understanding of that area. As you mentioned, we pay a lot more than other countries, and our outcomes are the same or worse. So while some of these numbers can be daunting, $40 trillion over 10 years, one of the things you have to remember is what's the alternative? And the alternative is probably $50 trillion over that time period. So while those numbers can be scary, they are better than the alternative. And interestingly, recently, the Koch brothers, a conservative group, has had the Mercator Institute do a study that suggested that the Sanders plan that's being proposed is actually $2 trillion less over 10 years. That's $200 billion a year. That's a significant amount of money. So I think we need to look at these options and move forward in that direction.
Okay. There are a substantial amount of people who know who you are, yet I've heard from a few of your constituents who aren't sure where you stand. In comparison to the two main political parties, where do you stand on most issues? And if there are certain issues that diverge from the normal, what are they?
One of the things that I want to be careful of is I'm running as independent because I want to be able to look at each idea, each issue on its own. So I think it's a little bit dangerous sometimes to say you lean one way or lean the other way. I've been talking about being pragmatic versus dogmatic. Some of the issues that I've talked about have been labeled as progressive. I believe that they're actually centrist as far as the number of people they affect. I have an economics background. I think you need to be able to justify the programs that you're paying for. And I'm very practical. So on things like energy, while I'm for renewable energy, I realize we're at a point in time and the technology is at a point where you're going to need transition plans. So instead of saying there's no place for something like natural gas, that's probably going to be a bridge fuel. And we need to figure out the best way to use it in that time period while we are aggressively moving towards renewables. So I think I try to look at things on its own versus fitting into one of those two buckets.
All right. As you know, the segment is part of MHN TV, the news program of Maynard High School, and is watched by many high school students. Many of us will be entering college quite shortly, and student debt is a very important topic to younger Americans. What will you do to alleviate the burden of student debt on many of the young people in America?
I'm very aware of it as well. As you know, my two children attend Maynard High School, so we'll be entering college in the next few years. This is a big problem. It could be the next crisis. There's over $1.5 trillion in student debt out there. I think a number of things should be happening. One is the interest rates that are charged to students that are subsidized by the federal government should not be a profit center. Today, the federal government makes money on that. I think we need to look at loan forgiveness programs. One of the things that's being innovative in the medical field is some providers are being given loan forgiveness for entering in the field of addiction services. There's a great opioid crisis going on right now. That's a way that we could do that. Some national service programs. And then I think we also have to hold the public nonprofit colleges accountable as well. We've done a fair amount focusing on the private colleges that have promised a lot, but have not delivered on that, and so people end up with debt that they don't have skills that they can replace. But the private colleges have been increasing. I think it's 17 times the amount of inflation over the last 20, 30 years. And we need to understand what their graduation rates are, how people are being employed after. And if they're not meeting their end of the bargain, they need to have some of the liability in the student debt. So I think there's a suite of things that we can do in that regard.
I'm sure you've been paying close attention to the recount that decided Lori Trahan as the Democratic nominee over Dan Coe. She will be facing Republican Rick Green. What do you have to say to your opponents in a race under a month and a half away?
I hope we all can discuss the issues that are important to this district. Recently, candidate Trahan skipped a rally that was in her favor to do some fundraising in New York, which I think is a perfect example of why the system is not working. I was at many events with Lori. She has a lot of good ideas to share, but she feels the pressure, like everybody does, to raise funds. And that's not something that we're in the business of. We need to be able to support our constituents. There's the opioid crisis, there's healthcare, there's the economy, there's education. All these things are very important, and we need to focus on those, not on how we get elected.
So, on that note of fundraising, do you feel that bringing money somewhat out of politics or not having as much uh, in the races would be beneficial to the American electoral system?
I do. I think some sort of public financing makes sense. In Seattle, they have an interesting concept called democracy dollars, where people get vouchers that they then can give to candidates they support. There's different tax credits that work the same way. So if a candidate gets a certain level of funding, then they get matching funding. So all of those types of things can add to engagement to the process. Another idea that I've heard is you could have a surtax or a luxury tax on advertising, and that money would then be used to finance other political reforms, maybe finance education, those type of things. We definitely need to get money out of the primary role it's playing in elections today.
Is there anything else you'd like our viewers to know before we leave?
I'd just like to give my website information and my social media. I'm at Mullen2018.com, on Facebook at Mullen2018, Twitter Mullen2018, and Instagram at Mullen_2018. If you've liked what you've heard today or want to learn more, you can go to those things. We need help on this campaign as an independent. All the help I can get is appreciated, so look forward to talking to you in the future. Thanks for having me on today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Once again, this was our exclusive interview with 3rd District Congressional candidate Mike Mullen. Tune in next week as we discuss Brett Kavanaugh's nomination to the Supreme Court. I'm Max Ludwig, and that was Top of the Hill.